Good morning, 12th grade. We are on day 4 of remote learning. I'm going to share my screen with you so that you can see our slides. So we're focusing on this idea of nobility to wrap up our learning with Julius Caesar. Focus objective: I can take a stance and justify it with sound reasoning and evidence. Not only making sure today that we have a firm stance in response to the question that I'm going to ask you, but also that there's sound reasoning and evidence to back up that stance that you take. So after our mindful minute, we have mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the most noble Roman of all? So I'm going to be asking you to weigh in on this today and consider who you believe to be the most noble Roman in the tragedy of Julius Caesar. And again, using sound reasoning and evidence, sufficient evidence in order to support that idea. So we're working on an argument. Argument paragraphs are opinions that are supported by facts, right? That's the difference between an argument and an opinion. We're making sure that we're using relevant details, relevant evidence in order to clearly support the argument that you're taking. Facts, expert research, right? And generally speaking about an argument. Today, when we're talking about supporting our stance through Julius Caesar, you're going to have to use references from the text, moments from different acts and different scenes that would support your stance, and using those instances that really highlight what your argument is and why your argument is so strong. So you want to ensure that you have a topic sentence on what your answer to who the most noble Roman of all is. You want to have some supporting sentences that give some general information, that have your evidence, that have your direct references to the play. And then you want to make sure that you conclude your argument, right? After you have taken the time to support your answer, you want to make sure that your answer is then concluded at the end. You can't just leave it hanging and without concluding it. So you have a couple of options here. You can choose Brutus as being the most noble Roman of all. And this is a very common place to land, right? There's a lot of references throughout the text of Brutus being the most noble, even in the end, and when we consider the way that Brutus ended his life in comparison to Cassius or Titinius, there is that idea of nobility that we've tracked Brutus with throughout the course of this play. You might also want to consider Mark Antony as being someone that you would consider to be the most noble, or Julius Caesar. Your options are whichever Roman you believe to be, but I figured that these three characters might produce the best argument or the best thinking to this question. For this assignment, you are going to decide on who you believe the most noble Roman to be. That would be your topic supporting sentence. I want you to think about defining what nobility is in the introduction to this answer before you start to shift into your evidence and your reason, because if you don't define nobility clearly, it's going to be very difficult for you to support why you believe X or Y character to be noble. So start off by defining nobility, then determine the character that you believe fits this idea of nobility. You need to provide at least 2 pieces of evidence or moments from the text that support your reasoning. That would be your evidence component, and then your reasoning would go along with that. So you can't just reference one part of the text and say this evidence or this moment shows that so-and-so is noble. You have to take that a step further by really addressing why that is. I also would like you to include a counterpoint or a counterclaim. This can just be a simple part or sentences in your evidence or in your response that address what somebody else might say in going against your claim. So if you choose that Mark Antony is the most noble Roman of all, and you have these pieces of evidence that support why you believe that, and you have your sound reasoning and all that, consider what somebody else might say in refuting that idea. You want to acknowledge that and then counter that with more evidence and more reasoning on why that idea is in fact not valid. Once again, you are getting credit for your organization, spelling, and mechanics, which I've bumped into like one chunk of the rubric. Please proofread before you submit. Email me with any questions. Once again, we are taking a stance, justifying it with sound reasoning and evidence. You may choose any of these three. You are welcome to choose someone else. I would suggest that one of the characters on this slide is probably the best bang for your buck in terms of making a really strong argument. Please make sure that you use 2 specific moments from the text. You support them with details and reasoning. You also need to include what someone else might say in opposition to what you believe. And you want to make sure that you refute that in order to make your argument stronger.